together. Feel free to ask me questions, ask each other questions. There's going to be some live polling. You can go to menti.com and enter this code 1429-2003. And I'm going to hand things over just for a minute to Sarah Riversi, who is a great friend, a great supporter of mine, who I'm so grateful for really sponsoring and hosting this event. And I just want her to share with you all a little bit about Future Food Institute in case you are not already familiar with the work that they do.
Thank you so much, Eve. I'm super excited to start with you this series of Hungry Book Club. I'm Sarah Riversi. I'm one of the founders of the Future Food Institute. Our organization, it's actually an ecosystem that is working on education, community development, and supporting industries, organizations, and governments really to drive this ecological transition that we need so much. We are very proud to host on our channels the program with Eve, and together with Eve, actually, we are also companion in the Food for Climate League. That is one of our most important and exciting initiatives. So actually, I take advantage to tell you all to go and check, have a look to our website at the foodforclimateleague.org. I look forward to follow the session. Thank you so much, Eve, and see you next week.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I'm just going to start off by introducing myself in case you all don't know me. I'm Eve Turow-Paul. I am founder of Food for Climate League. I am a food writer. Hungry is my second book. I also work as a consultant researcher. I do consider myself to be an activist. And it's also important to know I'm a millennial. I'm a mother. I think that informs the way that I see the world these days. And today we're going to be talking about the theme of control, anxiety, technology, covering the content that's in the first 3 chapters of the Hungry book. Now, if you didn't read Hungry yet, that's totally fine. You don't have to have actually read the book to enjoy today's conversation or to participate in the conversation. Though I do encourage you to pick up a copy. And you all should have received a discount code. If you didn't, please send one of us an email. We'll get that your way. Today, we're going to do about 15-20 minutes of intro of myself, just reviewing the themes in that first section of Hungry. Then we're going to welcome Dr. Daniel Levitin, who will be here for a 20-minute Q&A. I have a long list of questions for him. If you have questions for Daniel Levitin from the work that perhaps you've already read of his, you can submit your questions now on menti.com with the code 1429-2003. And if anyone's having trouble with that, please let me know. In fact, I am just going to make one small edit because I'm concerned that I have the settings so that you all can't submit your questions. Okay, great. That should be opened up. If anyone has any issues with it, let me know. So today, we're really going to be focusing in on this theme of control. In my work, what I've spent the last decade looking at is why is it really that so many of us are spending so much of our discretionary time and income on things in the food space? Why have we decided that it's worthwhile to spend sometimes $25 on a plate of avocado toast? And in order to answer the why behind today's biggest trends, I found that I really needed to go back to the why behind all of our behavior, which is, what is it that we all need to feel well? And I spent the time at the very beginning of my research for Hungry by doing really a landscape analysis of different theories of well-being. I looked at theories from neuroscientists, from psychologists, and also from religious leaders. And it was really interesting when I started to kind of lay all those theories on top of one another. I saw that all of these different theories really kind of overlapped in these 3 buckets of control, community, and purpose. And today we're going to be really digging into our desire and our need for control. So this is the way that Abraham Maslow defines control. He says that we all need a safe, orderly, predictable, lawful, and organized world in which unexpected, unmanageable, chaotic, or other dangerous things do not happen. I don't know about you. This is not exactly how I have been feeling lately. Just to kind of get a pulse of the room, I do encourage you right now to go to menti.com, type in the 1429-2003. For some reason, this is not showing up here, which I am super sorry about, but hopefully you can see the results on your own device. I can. And what it's showing is that in general, my anxiety level is high. Right now, we're at a 3. And then the others, my life feels orderly and manageable. Those numbers kind of getting a little bit lower. And I'll be able to send a follow-up for folks after this if you would like, with the responses that are coming through. I'm so bummed this is not showing up. All right, well, I'll learn for next time. But really, the numbers here that are coming in, anxiety level being high continues to go up for people. Generally feeling like you have enough time in the day to accomplish things. Okay, so this is something that I've been really curious about. While I was doing my research, I found that productivity and limited time was a major issue for a lot of people. And I was curious to see whether that was going to maintain itself through the pandemic. So right now, according to us, our general anxiety level is about 50%. I would say congratulations to those in this session, because your general level of anxiety or your likelihood to have a high anxiety level is actually lower than it was with the Hungry Study participants. What we saw is that Gen Z and millennials in particular, nearly 60% of our respondents for the Hungry Study, which I ran with Data Central, agreed or slightly agreed that their anxiety level is high. And there's been a lot of coverage over the last year about rising rates of anxiety and stress. It's important to note we were anxious before the pandemic. And a lot of my work digging into the topics in Hungry was around, well, what is causing this rising rate of anxiety? Why are we so anxious? And what we saw through the Hungry Study is there was actually a group, a subgroup that was more anxious than the general population. And those were the people who were most connected to their devices. We asked people whether they frequently or sometimes worry about a number of issues. It turned out that all of us are pretty anxious about a whole lot of things, but those who are spending the most time on their devices were more likely than the general population to say that they are anxious about all of these different topics. So again, there's one more poll, if you guys have not already done so, that you can answer on a scale. How much do you agree with? These questions are actually pulled from a nomophobia scale that are tracking how addicted you are to your device. So you guys have said that you're a 4. You're on the slightly agree scale, strongly agree scale. When I wake in the morning, the first thing you do is reach for your phone. Many of you feel a persistent desire to check your phone, and many of you feel anxious when you don't have your phone with you. And this is not really where I expected my own research to take me. I started off my work many, many years ago by saying, well, what is it that's driving people to these different behaviors? Whether it is an obsession with ramen, avocado toast, or goat yoga. And what I began to see time and time again through interviews and through reviewing different research papers was just these elevated rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness. And I had to dig into, well, what the heck is going on? What is driving this? And I began to focus in on the impact of the digital age. So this is just a brief example, really, that I think is encapsulating the changes that we have all seen over the last decade and some change. This is worldwide data, search data from Google Trends, starting in June 2007, which is when the iPhone debuted, not so long ago, going till January of 2019. And you can see that people searching things like, I have no friends, I can't sleep, am I depressed, how to calm anxiety, and what is the meaning of life were way, way up, sometimes quadruple the numbers of people who were putting these things into Google search. And then this week, I was really curious to see, well, what's happened during the pandemic? And it turns out that these numbers are even higher. Every single one of them has continued to rise over the last year. I have no friends now is far up. I can't sleep has more than doubled. And look at what is the meaning of life and how to calm anxiety. Those have really become exacerbated, especially in the last year. So today we're going to be focusing in mostly on the impact of technology, but I also want you all to keep in mind that the COVID environment that we're in has really exacerbated a lot of these existing issues. So what is it about tech that is driving these rising rates of anxiety and stress? Well, for a lot of us, having access to 24/7 news is not a great thing. And we're going to be talking to Dr. Levitin about that in a bit. Access to social media, email, screen time. A lot of these aspects of our environment are not natural to us. Most of these are not natural to us. And it turns out that being exposed to this much screen time, to a lot of these platforms, is having a negative impact on our well-being. It's driving rates of stress, anxiety, depression, burnout, overwhelm. I've had this theory that I actually think so many of us are feeling that burnout even this year working from home. I think that might be behind the snacking rates that we're seeing as well. So it was interesting to see that so many of you also feel as though you are short on time. Now, what happens when we feel as though we're out of control, right? Maslow and all of these other well-being philosophies say we need to feel like we're in control. We need to feel safe, like our lives have order. Well, right now, it seems like most of us don't feel that way, right? So how is it that we are coping? When we feel out of control, the natural thing for each of us is to want to get back into control, right? So when things are feeling a little bit crazy, we want to figure out a way to make ourselves feel as though we're going to be okay. And so what we have seen is this desire for control showing up in the way we choose to spend our discretionary time and money. So this is true, yes, in the past year, but also over the past decade. So number one, you're seeing people looking for products and items where they feel as though they are knowledgeable, where they feel as though they have some autonomy over it. We've seen a drive towards transparent and simple ingredients, things that are, quote, natural. There's a whole section in the book about the fact that natural doesn't actually mean anything. It just provides us with a sense of the fact that we are somehow in more control of our well-being and our choices perhaps than we are. But this is also has to do with the rising interest in things like astrology, people wanting to put an order, a framework around their being. And something that I'm hoping to talk to Dr. Levitin about as well is about the impact of this bad news cycle. So each of us has this inherent desire for knowledge. We are actually rewarded. Our brains reward us when we learn something new. And we're also animals that want to know about the bad things that are happening so that we can protect ourselves. But now we have these devices that allow us to learn about every bad thing happening all over the world all the time. And in that process, what we are learning is actually making our well-being a major, major problem. This is the problem of working from home. Is my mother just walking in the room right now? Oh, this age that we are in. Hello, Dr. Levitin. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Eve.
So I'm just going through a quick presentation and then we'll jump into our Q&A. So this desire for control is also showing up in trends around optimization. A lot of us, in order to create a sense of agency, are saying, okay, well, I want to control every single thing I'm putting in my mouth. I want to control the time that I'm spending on something. And especially during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people trying to optimize every bite through immune boosting foods. There's a lot of interest right now in like elderberry, people really trying to, again, feel like they're in control of their health and well-being. There's even a lot of people who are wasting less food, which is a great sustainability behavior. But most people aren't doing it for sustainability reasons. They're doing it because they want to take control of their pocketbooks. We also see a desire for control showing up in restrictive diets, whether that's the non-GMO movement, the gluten-free movement, free from, it's going to be very, very interesting to see which kinds of diets, if any, pick up steam in the pandemic environment and post-pandemic environment. I know that a lot of people have experienced the pandemic 15, as it's being called, and a lot of folks are really concerned about their health and well-being. It's also showing up, a desire for control is also showing up in a desire for comfort. And I think so many of us were feeling this, especially a year ago. We have been driving sales of snack foods, of garden seeds, of baking items. And prior to this, though, again, our anxiety rates were already elevated prior to the pandemic. And it was driving what a lot of people call the anxiety economy, whether that was floating centers or the popularity of CBD, or things like destruction therapy, where you can actually sign up, you're given a bat in a room and you can go break things. And those are all over the world. So looking ahead, there's a lot of different trends that we can expect to see as these rates of anxiety go up and up and up. The question continues to become, well, how do we try to manage that? And oftentimes it shows up through our food and lifestyle behaviors, right? We can choose where to spend our time. We can choose where to spend our money. And if we're all looking for coping mechanisms, this is really where it's going to be showing up. So thank you for being a great audience for that brief introduction. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking to Dr. Levitin, who I'm super, super excited to have here as part of the Hungry Book Club. And then we're just going to jump into a Q&A with myself, with each other, to talk about these themes. If you do have any questions, you can submit your questions now on menti.com. You can also upvote other people's questions if you want, instead of starting your own. But for now, welcome to Dr. Daniel Levitin. I'm super, super excited to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. And you know, Eve, I really loved your book.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, you provided a quote. So I have to say, Dr. Levitin and I have actually never met in person. But you did work with my brother, right?
Yes, and I know your father-in-law.
Yes. So there's all of these great connections. And you
Does everyone know who your father-in-law is?
My father, yeah.
Oh, your father. Yes,
Yeah.
your father.
My father is a legal thriller author. So in a different kind of vein of work, but definitely got the writing bug from him.
Scott Turow.
Yes, Scott Turow.
And,
thank you.
and he, I mean, he's also been a leader in the artistic advocacy community for writers. And he very generously provided a blurb to one of my books.
Aha, so I am benefiting from my father's good deeds.
As we all do.
Yeah.
And yet we don't have to pay the price for our father's bad ones.
Yes, well, hopefully. Well, thank you so much for joining us all today. I have a number of questions for you. So I've been kind of, selfishly excited to have you join me here, because I've been thinking a lot about just our general well-being, the difficulties that so many of us are experiencing, especially in the last year. And the things that I learned from you in your books that specifically explore this topic of information overload and are what happens to us when we become cognitively overwhelmed. It's been sticking with me in the back of my mind. And so I'm kind of just wondering, from your perspective, do you think that the news around COVID-19, around Black Lives Matter, is exacerbating the cognitive overload that you wrote about years ago in The Organized Mind?
Well, so cognitive overload is, as you know, Eve, a mismatch between the amount of information.
I don't know if I am frozen or if Dr. Daniel Levitin is frozen.
Oh, you seem frozen to me. But I'm still here.
Yes, there seems to be, sorry, it's the technical speaking here. It's Francesca. I think Eve's connection's just frozen. But please, Dr. Levitin, please carry on.
I'm told that Eve's connection is temporarily frozen and I should carry on since you all can hear me. Information overload is a mismatch between the amount of information we're trying to take in and the amount of information our brain can actually handle. I mean, your memory is virtually unlimited, but the amount of things you can attend to at one time or in a short amount of time is limited by our attention span. Attention is like a bottleneck. So I think that the Black Lives Matter and the COVID situations are different. I don't see the Black Lives Matter news as contributing to cognitive overload per se, because the BLM information was focused, informative. There weren't narratives really, apart from an alt-right attempt to claim that the Black Lives Matter movement was being invented or was a scam. But the difference between that and COVID is that the COVID story keeps changing, and it's changed for two reasons. One is that left to our own devices, scientists work slowly and deliberately. We're very reluctant to say something is true or is a fact unless we really know it to be. At least the scientists I know of who take seriously the obligation that science exists as a trust. Some people abuse that, of course. Famously, 300 scientists came out against climate change, but none of them were climate scientists. So it's misleading. They should not have ventured opinion. Somebody who's a geneticist or a botanist doesn't have the qualifications to make the determination. The COVID story then evolved because our scientific understanding evolved. First, you're supposed to wear a mask, then you're not. First, spread on surfaces, then it can't, and then it can, and then it can't. I think the information overload there is the public was frustrated at seeing behind the back door, behind the curtain. Scientists aren't willing to commit. But the second problem, information overload and COVID, is that there were alternative narratives being spun, that it was a hoax, that the vaccines are just a plot. There's still, I'm in Los Angeles, which is a fairly well-educated neighborhood. Half of the people in my neighborhood are wearing masks and haven't. And moreover, you know, we keep reading in the papers, people are suspicious of vaccine. So this alternative narrative is contributing to overload because many people on the fence are saying, what do I believe?
Right. And so I'm sorry, of all the times to have internet issues, I'm having internet issues right now. So I'm now with you on my phone and I missed the first part of your response, but I'm going to assume that this wasn't yet addressed. And I'm curious if you can just walk us all through what are the mechanisms of cognitive overload? Like what is actually happening in our minds? And can you explain, you know, what did our minds evolve for in terms of information processing versus what we're experiencing these days?
Well, what's happening in situations of cognitive overload is that first, as you pointed out, our brains are information machines. We survived the savannah and civilization and creativization through our ability to learn new things, desire to learn new things. And so we've evolved neurochemical and neuroanatomical systems that reward us when we learn something new. Across 40,000 years of evolutionary history, information came in slowly. You know, I mean, think of yourself in a hunter-gatherer society living with a group of 120 people. You're not meeting very many new very often. You're going to the cell. Maybe it dries up and it's a huge event that you have to look for another well. And, you know, that's the news for, you know, maybe once a year, there's some big development. Our brains evolved to deal with it at that time scale. Now what happens is the double-edged sword of wanting to learn things, but there's now an infinite of new things that one can learn. Basically, you can access more information than was contained in the Library of Alexandria on this thing. You can virtually every song that's ever been recorded. Virtually all the information known to humankind is available through this. And some of it gets pushed to us without us wanting it in various feeds and dings and beeps. At some point, we keep wanting to learn more, even if we don't think we need to know it. We have to know it because we're getting that little reward, that little shot of pleasure hormones. And then we're trying to make a decision about what is important and what's real.
Mm-hmm.
Each time you make a decision, you use up oxygenated glucose in the brain, which is in limited supply, and it takes a while to replenish. So you get to a point of decision fatigue.
Yeah.
And then you feel exhausted, depleted, and you start drawing poor conclusions.
And so, I mean, part of what I'm really fascinated by is how this sense of overwhelm, our cognitive depletion, is showing up in the ways that people spend their time and money. And this is also because listen, I know that money talks, and now these days I'm really focused on sustainability and driving sustainable food behaviors, and advising different companies on how to help people take on behaviors that are actually better for them and better for the environment. And I was asking a researcher last week about the impact of perhaps cognitive overwhelm on flavor. And what this particular individual told me was that it actually can help to tell people more about a product. It will allow them to appreciate the flavors more if they're cognitively overwhelmed. And that surprised me. This researcher had done a study who basically showed that when we are overwhelmed, we appreciate simple flavors. Makes sense, right? We don't have the ability, we're tired. We don't want to process everything. And he said, well, what restaurateurs could be doing right now for people, or people who are creating new products, is actually put more information on the label. Does that theory make sense to you?
This is outside of my area of expertise, so I haven't read it, but it makes sense because there would be an evolutionary drive when you're cognitively overloaded, when you're overwhelmed by information, to turn to your senses for information rather than just what's in your head and just what you're being told in speech or reading. So any sensorial pleasure, any sensorial experience could be a relief.
That makes a lot of
whether it's food or listening to the sounds of nature, having sex, anything that involves a sound bath or an actual bath.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and this is what in Hungary, a lot of what it was that I was digging into, which is, understanding the appreciation for sound bathing, for floating, for crystals, right? There's a lot of things that all of us are turning to help us kind of understand and make sense of the world. For those who do have questions for Dr. Levitin, feel free. You can just add it to the chat, which I'm monitoring now, or you can add it to menti.com, whatever you prefer. And so I'm wondering from your perspective, what do you do to manage cognitive overload, especially during this particular period of time? What are your strategies?
Well, this is a process. So I laid out a lot of it in The Organized Mind, which came out in 2014. And the basic advice is good, but one can customize or personalize refinements to it. So for example, I don't have my email on all day long. I set aside a time when I'm going to deal with email, because otherwise, I like many people who are acts, I get 300 to 400 emails every day. And if I were to spend just 1 minute on each one, that's the day. So there's a certain amount of triage and prioritizing. So anybody there who sends me an email, if I don't get back to you right away, I apologize. Including you, Eve.
Very efficient, so I appreciate that.
So part of it is, I would say, partitioning where and how and when you get information. So people know people need to reach me know I'm not on email all the time like I used to. They can't say, let's get together for lunch in 5 minutes. They have to text me. And not very many people have my cell number, so that limits things. I don't get email on the phone. That would just make it blow up, and be pinging all the time. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, but not with push notifications. I check them. I set aside a half hour each day for social media. I decided some people are part of the conversation. They're riding the Twitter wave. Any big thing that comes out, they need to comment on. They need to build up their following. They need to be there ready and nimble to respond. More power to them. I made a conscious choice. Too much information and too much distraction from my writing and my research and my music making. And then the other thing is I kind of impose digital blackout periods. A couple hours a day. I'm not doing anything digital. The phone's off, the computer's off. I'm just doing something replenishing.
What are your replenishing activities?
Well, every day I try to walk for an hour. I live near a park, and that's, I get lots of opportunities to see trees and birds and squirrels, and just hear the sounds of nature rather than the sounds of electronics. I take a nap every afternoon. I play the piano and the guitar every day.
This
those
sounds
kinds of things.
lovely. I don't know about everyone else in the room, but this sounds like, honestly, a bit like the opposite of my existence these days. And we are going to be talking in the third and final book club. We're going to be bringing in Dr. Keltner, who's going to be talking to us about his own research on the benefits of, communing with nature and awe and gratitude.
Oh, you all are in for a great treat. Docker is a wonderful thinker and speaker, and it's a real coup that you got.
I know. I feel very, very lucky.
I'm small potatoes compared to Docker.
No, that's not true at all. And so I'm part of what I've been dealing with. Okay, so Hungry is a book. Yes, it's about food trends, but really it's looking at the way we choose to spend our time and money as a lens into our general well-being. Right? Like, why is it that so many of us feel it's worthwhile to spend so much money on avocado toast? It's because it's making us feel better on a foundational level. And something that I've been combating personally over the last year is really this feeling that I'm supposed to be everywhere at once. There's a new app that's really popular called Clubhouse that people are like, you need to be on Clubhouse. And I'm like, well, do I? And really I'm having trouble taking a step away and evaluating what's actually necessary versus what our society is telling us is necessary. Do you think that there's going to be a pushback against this idea of be everywhere all the time? Or do you think that this is just where we are? This is the future. It's just going to accelerate and continue to get worse?
Well, I don't feel qualified as a neuroscientist to answer that. You need like a futurist or a sociologist or something. What I can observe is,
can we take more of it is really the question.
I don't think we can take more distraction. Just imagine if Michelangelo had Twitter. I can't imagine the Sistine Chapel would have gotten finished. All these things are nice, and they're pleasurable, they're leisure, they're hobby, they're distractions. And I think one needs to carve out for their day, their week, their life. What are the things that are important to me? And I think that it's important for our well-being and our sense of self and place in the community to have something that we maintain a commitment to in a sustained manner, whether it's volunteer work, helping out in a hospital or an old people's home as a volunteer, whether it's tutoring or mentoring, or something more, creating, painting, doing music, writing, or trying to learn more about whatever job you're in so that you can contribute to the health and growth of the company.
Mhm.
not just putting in the time at the time clock, but putting in the mental time. The idea of sustained, anything worth doing, writing a song, writing a book, having a relationship with somebody,
Yeah.
it it can't be fractionated into little 1 minute and 2 minute intervals. So we do have to decide. And as David Byrne sang, same as it ever was, right? That they tried to foist beanie babies on us. You have to have a beanie baby. And now here's a new one, and now here's another one.
Yeah,
And
there's a new one. I don't remember what it's called, but I just saw an article about this. Yes.
Yeah, you have to have it. Stop what you're doing right now. It's not as important as finding that new beanie baby. Marketers are always going to be doing that. So we have to exercise some self-control.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that's, I spend a lot of my time now focused on food and sustainability and thinking about the fact that our agriculture system is really leading us down the wrong path for a number of reasons. But I've also been thinking about, well, are we leading ourselves down a destructive path as well, as it has to do with our mental health? And, the final question that I have for you is really about, do you think that the reason why we are living in this way is because we have this brain that we evolved with in a very different world? Is there a way to right this? Like, what is really pushing us into this way of living that ultimately I think is leading to the highest rates of anxiety and depression that we've ever experienced as a species?
Well, I think the basic principle here is called evolutionary lag, which was coined by my friend and colleague, Robert Sapolsky, a biologist. The idea that it takes the genome thousands or tens of thousands of years to adapt to the current environment. So in many respects, not all, our brains were equipped to deal with life as it was, say, 20,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we have to wait 20,000 years to be able to deal with the internet, because by then it'll be gone and there'll be something else. There'll be neurochips or something, who knows? We'll all be cyborgs, or we'll have killed the planet with global warming, but or violence. But I think it just means that the same brains that got us here can solve the problem through education, um, a little bit more of a focus on being deliberate about your choices, in much the same way that we try to teach kids that they can't eat all the candy in the Halloween bag at once. We need to be our own parent in this situation with information and not eat it all at once just because it's there. It'll make us sick.
I think that's excellent advice to leave us with. And I'd like to, at this point, kind of turn it over to audience. We have some great questions that have come in on Mentimeter and then also through this chat. But I'd like to talk to everyone here about, like, how can we parent ourselves with these technologies when they're being developed in many ways to keep us addicted, in the same way that processed food has. So I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Levitin, for sharing with us, for joining us during this book club. And I encourage everyone, if you are not already familiar with Dr. Levitin's work, please do check it out. Clearly, you can see that this man is brilliant, has a lot to teach, and you will absolutely walk away having learned something of value by picking up one of his books. So thank you so much for joining us, and please stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Eve. You too.
So it's just been really great to watch the questions coming in the chat. And I'm going to encourage people. We have a really nice group, about 35 of us. This is exactly the number of people that I wanted, because it's small enough that we can unmute. You can turn your cameras on. Feel free just to pipe up engaging conversation. I'm going to start looking through the questions that have come in. I'm glad to see that there are a lot of people who agree with me about Clubhouse. Like, I actually asked one of my colleagues the other day, I was like, am I the only one that feels overwhelmed by this? So thank you for validating my feelings, everyone. I'm just going to jump over to this really critical question that came in on Mentimeter. Do you think that there is an actual need for social media? And if so, what is it? Before I answer, I'm going to invite all of you to chime in. I want to make sure that you do have the ability to turn off your mics and turn on your video. I'm actually not 100% positive that. Francesca, do you know if folks have that ability on here?
Yes, they do.
Okay, yeah. So feel free. This is a room full of. I know a lot of you. I'm really excited to see so many of your wonderful faces here. Feel free. You can unmute, chime in. You know, the question is, do you think there's a real need for social media? And if so, what is it? And then I will give my own opinion on this. Is there any, you can feel free and use like the little raise hand emoji if you want. Liz, were you gonna say something?
I think there is. I think the whole point is connecting. It's amazing to connect with, you know, people from around the country and across the world. I know in my line of work, Eve, you know that I'm building brands and coming up with new ideas. And we have ideations with people all over the globe, which we've had for a long time, but I feel like it's just getting even better and more efficient and wider reaching. Clubhouse is another story, friends. I'm gonna say that for next subject.
Does anyone feel the opposite of Liz? Does anyone want to make the argument that social media is just completely unnecessary?
Eva, can I say something?
Yes, go for it, Zena.
I'm conflicted on this. I actually asked this question, and it's something that I'm spending some time about. I do see the values of being able to connect globally and to staying in touch with people, especially during this time in kind of a low engagement way. Like, oh, I just post a picture and then hundreds of people know what I'm doing, so I don't need to talk to them. But inherently there, I also see a problem with it, because it creates that feeling of connectivity, but it doesn't create that deeper connection between two human beings. I don't think there is a world where we would not have social media. It's just something like, do I make this half-hour time to share a post and listen and engage on social media? Or do I take the 30 minutes to actually have a real conversation directly with somebody?
Right. And this is also something we're going to dig into more next week. We have a whole session planned around the theme of community and belonging, and we're going to have Dr. Brian Primik on, and he specifically studies the impact of social media on well-being. He's done some really, really fascinating research. So I know that I'm going to save this question and also ask it of him to see what his response is. You know, my personal feeling over this past year was like, well, thank goodness that we have, you know, social media, even after doing all this research, right? Most of Hungry is really about the detrimental impacts of tech on our well-being. But I thought, thank God I can talk to my friends, I can FaceTime people, I can share pictures. And then I caught up with one of the researchers who I had talked to, Dr. Larry Rosen, in Hungary. And he said to me, he was like, well, but what would you be doing if you weren't on social media? He's like, would you maybe be like outside going on more walks? Would you be getting to know your neighbors? Would you be writing letters? And it really made me question this stance. You know, I understand from a business perspective, and kind of a perspective of, you know, encouraging people to appreciate the humanity around the world, what makes us all equal, you know, having the opportunity to interact with people all over the world is a beautiful thing. But it makes me question, you know, like hearing Dr. Levitin talk about this is just not the environment that our brains literally evolved for. And also reading about rates of depression and anxiety, it really does make me question. Julia, I see that you just put in a comment. I'll read it, and then if you want to unmute and add. Oh, there's very loud construction in your building. Okay, so I'll just read it out loud for everyone's benefit. Do we need social media? No, we're fine, but we were fine before it came along, but it's been as helpful as it may have been destructive. Helpful, yes, in terms of connection, but also in terms of democratizing news coverage. Would as many people be fighting for social and racial justice as did this summer if we hadn't seen the video of George Floyd that was captured by, I believe, a civilian? Very, very good point, right? The other, I would say like does anyone have a counter argument to that? Like whether this is really, Victoria, yeah, go ahead.
I don't have a counter argument. I want to support that. I think the speed with which we can make various changes in the world, just even like I see the 6 of us on this screen on my computer, and I'm not sure where everybody's based, but maybe Eve or Liz or Jacina, if you had learned something right now, I mean, you can get it to Miami. For sure. Oh, how cute! Hi, sweetie.
Hi, Liz's son.
I mean, we can get the news around very, very quickly, even if it's just what we're concerned about.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the other questions that came in were actually about coping mechanisms, right? Not like, is this good or bad, but like, okay, it's here. How do we deal with it? I'm curious to know specifically, how are you guys soothing your anxieties during the pandemic? What hobbies or habits have you picked up? And bye, Alexandra. Thank you for joining. I'm curious to know what other people's coping mechanisms have been. You know, like Dr. Levitin, I have tried doing like a digital Shabbat. I was off of social media for a few months. Actually, while I was doing the research for Hungry, I became so enraged that I had to just like cut myself off. But then I had to log back in because I had a book to sell and promote. And now I have an organization that I need to promote. And I'm honestly having a really hard time managing all of this. So I'm wondering, what are everyone else's tactics? Whether that's managing the actual time you spend on social media, or do you have another activity like going on a walk that is kind of like your Zen activity to recenter you and reconnect you with your body, your mind? Does anyone have anything to share?
I'm happy to share. Hi,
Thanks, Ellen.
my name is Ellen, and I honestly have started to do a little bit more meditation during this whole pandemic, and I'm super connected around the world because I've lived in 4 different countries, and I have the opportunity on Wednesday afternoons to connect with my yoga instructor from the UK and do an hour long, or not an hour long, about 20-minute long meditation with her every Wednesday. And she connects with the whole group throughout the UK, and then me. And, it's just a nice kind of reset. But I think companies like Headspace have really been a great benefit, even for just a 5-minute just shutdown to really just reset, frankly, and refresh.
Yeah, Deanne, you say you're doing a lot more biking and hiking, and your dog is also happy about that.
Dog is very happy. I mean, partly, as you know, Eve, I was traveling about 80% of the time for work. So I spent my life on an airplane. So for me, this has been, I mean, I hate to say it, but it has been such a refreshing break to give me time to take care of myself instead of waking up and wondering what city I was in.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about like how you're going to integrate any of this into your life kind of as we hit restart in a few months, hopefully?
We're hitting restart, but I don't think I'm ever going to be traveling the way I was before. I think we've discovered that an awful lot of business tasks that we thought had to be live and in person, we're able to do virtually. And, while nothing replaces that face-to-face conversation, I think a lot of the day-to-day stuff we will continue to do virtually in the future. So I don't think, certainly not through December of this year, I don't think I will be on a plane for work.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, this is also part of like what I'm really interested in is like we've been forced to hit pause. So like we have a choice right now of how much of our previous behaviors we will choose to reintegrate. And kind of going back to Julia's point about social media, Deanne, you're talking about like you had this busy schedule, hopping on planes, going from one place to the next. It was too much, right? And then it's scaling back. It's not saying I'm going to block all travel out for all time, but what you were doing was not optimal for your well-being, nor was it necessary for your business, right? And I think that same process has to happen with social media and hasn't happened yet. We're still like waking up every morning and wondering where we are. No one stopped to pause and say, well, how much of this is actually necessary? How much of it's actually benefiting me? And And I think that it's hard to, at least I found it very hard to even take that time to really sit and think about what's productive versus what do I feel obligated to do. Amy, I see your raised hand. Do you want to share?
Hi, I'm Amy, and I'm in Northern California. I, like your esteemed guest, I take a nap every afternoon. And when I go in there, I start reading. That's where I bring my books to read about climate or bringing beavers back into nature, whatever. But it's important. I take that time, and that's when I read. And I also had COVID, so I'm kind of recovering from that. But when I go on walks with my friends, a lot of times they'll say, "Where's your phone?" And I purposely leave my phone behind and think, what could possibly happen in 1 hour of my life that I'm so important to everybody else that they can't, they have to hear from me in 1 hour. It's like, take a break and really enjoy the walk and enjoy the nature. So that's what I'm doing. And it does help.
Yeah. Julia said she's taking daily walks and hot baths, and she feels lucky to now have a romantic partner. If people aren't following Julia Bainbridge, start following Julia Bainbridge. Because she has a new amazing book out that you should know about. That's all about celebrating non-alcoholic spirits. But she also has this amazing romance story, like Amy, who also has a romance story of the pandemic. But Julia's been sharing that, which has been like my way, I guess, a benefit of social media. I've experienced some joy by watching Julia's joy on social media. So please follow Julia Bainbridge and buy her book. But she's saying she uses the Freedom app to lock herself out of social media so that she can focus. She said, just like we can take drugs or medicine to keep us from consuming drugs, I'm thinking of alcohol, we can now use technology to bar us from using technology. That's interesting. And I kind of, that trend had already started pre-pandemic. And I've seen some indications that because we're so steeped in this digital screen-based world right now, that those kinds of innovations are going to get stronger and stronger. It'll be interesting too to see in the business world how brands can help us better manage this relationship and connect with the things that make us happy. Arietta, you went to my last question actually, which is for everybody. What opportunities has this period of time provided you to reconnect specifically with food culture, your local food culture? Arietta, do you want to chime in, or I can read yours out loud? But Arietta works in the craft beer industry in Mexico. And she says she's been turning to food related activities like creating different salts, salsas, and hot sauces, especially to share with our friends that might be a little bit lonelier, which led her to start growing her own chilies. That's really nice. I don't know how you made like flavored salts, I'm assuming you're talking about, but that sounds wonderful. Has anyone else, like, have you found that this pause, the push of staying at home, has it allowed you to connect at all with the land around you, the food providers around you? And if so, what has that been like? And do you think that that's something that you would want to continue once we're past the lockdown? Is anyone brave enough to chime in?
I'll say here in Boulder, we call it the Silicon Valley of food. We've always had a focus on independent restaurants and retailers, but it's even more so now, especially as the restaurants struggle to survive. So we've had a lot of them who've braved the storm with all of the outdoor dining creativity and off premise. But now we're just helping them to sort of get back to where they had been before and be even better with all kinds of alternate revenue streams. So I think the restaurant scene has been definitely an area of focus.
I'm also really interested to see how the social justice and racial justice element of this past year is going to play out in terms of like local activism.
And diversity and inclusion initiatives and everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to celebrate where we all are. And I feel like we spend so much of our time chasing the trend that's elsewhere, the food that grows elsewhere, the chef that lives elsewhere, instead of looking at who is where you are, who can you support, who can you celebrate, what traditions can you celebrate? I don't know if people have been engaging in that yet. If you have, I would love to hear about it either now or over email. But we only have 2 minutes left. So I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join in this conversation and engage in exploring this topic of anxiety and our desire for control and structure. And it's just been a pleasure for me. I will say personally, I published this book in June of last year. It was a tough time to publish anything because I didn't feel appropriate to even talk about this at that time. And now it finally does. And I'm just really excited to have a group of folks who are willing to engage with me on this. So next week, we are going to be joined by Dr. Brian Primik. We're going to be focusing exclusively on our desire for community, belonging, and the ways that social media helps us and also really hurts our ability to connect deeply with others. So I think he's going to be able to stick around for the full hour. He's, like, crazy fascinating. I loved my interview with him for the book. So I encourage you all to join us if you have the time. And then the week after that is with Dr. Keltner. Also someone who I've just like fangirled for many, many years. He does research on gratitude and awe and our connection to nature. And we'll be talking about how to create a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So that is the third week, and that's where we're going to wrap things up. So thank you, everyone. I really, really appreciate your participation. And feel free, send me emails, thoughts, feedback. I'm going to fix the technical glitches for next week. So please be safe. Take care of yourselves, and please go outside. All right, I'll see you all next